Hello and welcome to another episode of Stand Up. I hope that you are doing okay here on Wednesday. It is the 8th of January. If you're listening on Wednesday, I have an excellent guest who hasn't joined me in a while, but very excited to have him back. Nicholas Grossman is my guest, and we talked for well over an hour. It was a fascinating conversation which covered a whole lot of ground, from Facebook fact-checking, or lack thereof, how we lost January 6th, and an unexpected turn in the conversation with Professor Grossman. Says he's really enjoyed the conversation I've been trying to host about what it means to be a man today, the men and boys conversation. University of Illinois' Nicholas Grossman joins me for a fascinating conversation. Today you can jump to it at about 25 minutes into today's show. But I've got other things to share with you, as I do every day on the daily podcast. I've got your headlines and audio clips from yesterday, as well as the good stuff to get us started. So let's start there right now. I think positive feedback on the show is good stuff. I love that. Thank you to Mark Cunningham in Pennsylvania, who emailed me and said, today's show, David Rothkopf, was outstanding. Opened up a whole way of understanding where things are at this point in time and where things are likely to head in Trump's first year, where Trump and co. face reality once they're responsible for steering the ship. Strap in, Donald. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. Kayleen also emailed me and said how much she loved David Rothkopf, and I heard from listener Eric Anderson, who texted me and said, the podcasts have been on fire lately. Great chat with David Rothkopf. Thank you, all of you and everybody else, for the positive feedback. Always welcome. Email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. All right, now here's a couple of good news stories for the good stuff, starting with this one. In a very laudable civic accomplishment, all 411 buildings owned and operated by the city of Chicago now either run on renewable energy or offset their emissions through financing renewables across the country. The news helped ring in the new year and marks 3 years since the city signed a major agreement to receive solar power from the largest solar farm east of the Mississippi. The former Chicago mayor, Lori Lightfoot, signed an agreement to buy power from that company in 2022. So all Chicago city buildings operated by the city, now run on renewable energy. How about that? I think that's a great news story, really good one, and other cities should follow their lead. And I also love this one. Once like a war zone, El Salvador's homicide rate is now freakishly low, and the public is celebrating. That's right. It's always good stuff when we read and learn about falling violent crime rates across any country or city. The latest homicide statistics coming out of neighboring El Salvador are truly something to celebrate. Put simply, the current administration there, the Bukele administration, has turned the country from the most murderous in Latin America to the safest across a 5-year term, a 98% drop over 9 years. So really, really interesting and important and worth celebrating. 2 stories there for the good stuff. Good news for the good stuff. And now, here is our friend Dan Harris of 10% Happier with some great advice on how to keep your New Year's resolutions, and you can make these resolutions anytime you want. They don't have to be New Year's. I think this advice applies. Also, a plug for his meditation program, which I highly encourage. Here he is.
If you have a New Year's resolution, have a great hack so that you're one of the few people who actually keeps it, because most of us bail on our resolutions by February. Here's the hack. Don't do it alone. There is a ton of evidence that if you have social support, if you do something with other people, you're much more likely to stick with it. We live in an individualistic society where we believe we have to do everything by ourselves, like the Marlboro Man roaming the prairies, but that's bullshit. What's the mechanism here? First of all, other people can give you motivation and encouragement. Second, they can hold you accountable. It's easy often to let yourself down, but it's much harder to let other people down. So whatever it is you're trying to do, if it's exercise, join a running club. If it's reading more, join a book club. If your New Year's resolution is to get into meditation, I'm launching a free 7-day challenge over at danharris.com. Every morning, you'll get a guided meditation in your inbox, completely free. It's short and easy. And then in the evenings, I'll be doing live Q&A where you can sign on with a friend and family member and ask me questions. So you can do this challenge with a colleague, your spouse, a friend, and it will make it easier. And even if you don't have somebody to do it with, just doing this challenge and knowing that thousands of other people are doing it with you, that too will make it easier. All right, don't forget, social support helps with your resolutions. Inner peace, mother. If you
Yeah, there you go. Our friend Dan Harris over at 10% Happier with some great advice. And finally, I've got a poem for you. Today's poem is by the great Mary Oliver. It's called I Worried, read by me. I worried a lot. Will the garden grow? Will the rivers flow in the right direction? Will the earth turn as it was taught? And if not, how shall I correct it? Was I right? Was I wrong? Will I be forgiven? Can I do better? Will I ever be able to sing? Even the sparrows can do it, and I am, well, hopeless. Is my eyesight fading, or am I just imagining it? Am I going to get rheumatism, lockjaw, dementia? Finally, I saw that worrying had come to nothing, and gave it up, and took my old body and went out in the morning and sang. I Worried by Mary Oliver. That's the name of that poem, and that is today's good stuff. I hope it sets you up with good feelings and good motivation. Maybe you want to end there and come back to the rest later. But I've got your headlines, your audio clips, and an amazing interview with Nicholas Grossman. So I hope that you'll stay. All right, well, let's get to those headlines now. Remember, I can't do any of this without you. Thank you so much for your support. If you appreciate all the work I'm putting into gathering and sharing all this information in an informing and entertaining way, go to patreon.com/Pete Dominick right now to support the work with a paid subscription, because while it is free, it is not cheap. And this is independent media. I am doing it all on my own. Can't do it without your support. So thank you so much to everybody who does already. All right, let's get to those headlines from yesterday. What a crazy day yesterday in news. Let me put it all together in one big sentence where I edit out every time I take a breath. Let's start with Jimmy Carter lying in state at the U.S. Capitol on Tuesday night as Washington honors the former president. Now let's go to the West Coast. The Palisades fire in Southern California has forced more than 30,000 residents to evacuate from a high wind-driven fire that looks like it's getting real close to the Getty Museum. Yesterday we had a whole bunch of news on the oligarchy that's coming into shape right here in America. We learned yesterday Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg is trying out a new look and announced, more importantly, that the third-party fact-checking program that Facebook created will now impact billions of users across Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp, and Threads will be ending. Yeah, they're going to go with community notes to follow Elon Musk's lead. Also, Zuckerberg added Dana White to the Meta board, shocking us, but not just naming a Trump family member. But don't worry, Amazon's Jeff Bezos did that favor. He announced yesterday that they'd be paying Melania Trump $40 million for a documentary on Amazon Prime that nobody wants. Apple CEO Tim Cook did his part by donating $1 million to the Trump inauguration. That is your oligarchy wrap up for yesterday. And the leader of it all, well, he had a pretty good day. His favorite handpicked judge did another big solid. That's right. Aileen Cannon issued a temporary order, an order temporarily blocking the release of special counsel Jack Smith's final report on his investigations into Trump. Will we ever see it? I think the chances are fairly low. However, apparently he can't find his way to corrupt Judge Juan Merchan in New York because he denied Schittler's bid for an emergency order, halting our cartoon future villain president's scheduled sentencing Friday on criminal charges in the hush money case. So he's definitely pissed and worried about that, I guess. Also, not too bad because he gave a 90-minute speech, took several questions from reporters at his dumb palace of sins in Florida yesterday. He made all kinds of threats, promises he couldn't keep, really embarrassing, stupid remarks, and a big announcement about renaming the Gulf of Mexico that's meant to distract us, I'm guessing. Then, of course, he told a whole bunch of insidious lies while sucking on his own dick. It was a real Trump classic Cybertruck fire of a press conference. But remember, we got to wake up. So much of this is to distract us. Prices are not getting lower. Housing's not being solved. There's no Ukraine peace deal. We don't have the hostages in Gaza released yet. He's a weapon of mass distraction, and we don't want to fall for it again, but I am going to cover it and pay attention to it so that you don't necessarily have to. Also, the House passed its first piece of legislation led by Republicans yesterday that targeted undocumented immigrants charged with non-violent crimes for deportation. So congrats, the pain begins. A magnitude 7.1 earthquake struck near one of Tibet's holiest cities. At least 126 people died, according to Chinese state media. The guy who's still president, Joe Biden, for 2 more weeks, well, he's trying his best to protect whatever rights and natural monuments that he can on his way out. The news yesterday is that President Biden will travel to Coachella Valley in California and announce the creation of 2 national monuments that together will protect more than 848,000 acres of land in the state from drilling and mining, as well as wind, solar, and other energy development. I hope President Biden doesn't get stuck in the mud out there in Coachella. And finally, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau moved yesterday to ban medical debt from appearing on credit reports, potentially lifting the credit scores of about 15 million Americans and making it easier for them to obtain loans. So that would be a really good thing to hold on to. Those are your headlines that I gathered for you from yesterday. Please send me yours. What am I missing? What's being undercovered? Let me know. standupwithpete@gmail.com. Now let's get to those audio clips that I've got for you. I want to start with the always excellent Chris Hayes on MSNBC. I loved his breakdown at the beginning of his show in the first segment.
Now, it seems pretty obvious why you make all these moves, to curry favor with the big guy and his political partisans. But it's also worth recalling why Meta had to institute its soon-to-be former fact-checking policy in the first place. This has been totally written out of history. They didn't do all the fact-checking stuff out of nowhere. They certainly didn't because Mark Zuckerberg woke up one day and was like, we should fact-check. No. Let's remember the history there. They did it because starting in 2016, the platform that Zuckerberg founded, Facebook, was used to execute an ethnic genocide of the Rohingya Muslim minority by the military government of Myanmar. Tens of thousands of people were murdered in bloody and brutal pogroms. Accounts of gang rape. People have to flee their village. Hundreds of thousands left homeless. As an in-depth Reuters investigation found, the hateful language and the calls for violence that fueled the massacres were systematically promoted by bad actors. The poisonous posts called the Rohingya or other Muslims dogs, maggots, and rapists, suggest they be fed to pigs, and urge they be shot or exterminated. This was being posted on Facebook, okay? A United Nations investigator said Facebook was used to incite violence and hatred against the Muslim minority group. The platform, she said, had turned into a beast. Imagine having to tweak your product because you realize that the libelous, violent incitement on your platform spurred on the mass slaughter of an ethnic minority. Again, this, I don't know if people remember this or not, but it was big news at the time. Zuckerberg was raked across the coals by senators in open hearings on Capitol Hill. That was when the Facebook billionaire realized content moderation was good, or if not good, at least necessary. It was something he had to reiterate again after January 6th, not this January 6th, of course, January 6th, 2021, when it became obvious that Trump and his allies used Facebook to spread election lies and organize the rallies that would become a deadly Capitol insurrection. After that, Meta banned Trump from its platforms, a move Zuckerberg openly defended at the time, saying that Donald Trump had used their platforms to incite a violent insurrection, which is obviously not even a controversial claim he had. Now here we are, Zuckerberg's just, I guess, memory wiping all of that, rolling it back. To placate the incoming president he once banned, the top vector of disinformation in America today, an incoming president who just months ago wrote that Zuckerberg plotted against him in the 2020 election, and the Meta CEO would, quote, spend the rest of his life in prison if he crossed Trump again. Do you think that perhaps swayed Zuckerberg? I don't know. Donald Trump, though, has a theory.
Do you think he's directly responding to the threats that you have made to him in the past?
Probably. Yeah, probably.
Yeah, probably. Great breakdown by Chris Hayes last night. Also worth just playing the response from one of his first guests during that segment, who explains why it's not just the threats that they're worried about, the penalties, is that they're trying to curry favor on the important issues that they care about, like regulations and rules around AI and crypto and more. Here's Faiz Shakur on MSNBC with Chris Hayes last night, which I thought was great and also disconcerting.
I think these are their politics and their material interests.
Yes, you're driving right at it. They want something. It isn't just that, oh, hey, we're billionaires and we want to influence and curry favor with Trump. That's all true to get certain things. And I would say there's 3 major threads that bond all of these tech billionaires, the so-called Magnificent 7 top stocks that have done very, very well, those major 7 companies who are now doling money out to Trump. They want the regulators at the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Trade Commission, the Federal Communications Commission, who will be friendly to them and do what would be good for big tech. tech. That's number one. And as we know, Lena Khan and others have been all up in their grill in ways that they don't like. Number two is they want to expand this crypto world, right? They're very into it. You've seen the investments they're making into crypto. And I think they'd like the idea that Trump is going to go heavy into a laissez-faire approach to crypto. And then third is AI. I mean, AI is going to be replacement of labor here. And big tech has made huge investments into AI world, and they need an administration who's going to be very favorably looking upon them as they make those investments to displace labor over the next few years.
Oh, I thought that was a very, very important and impressive breakdown. So I wanted to share that with you as well. I like this short clip I saw on Instagram yesterday. This is Rick Wilson talking about the kind of MAGA civil war and what to expect. And I talk about this with Nicholas Grossman as well. Some Democrats seemingly have decided they want to work with the Trump administration to get some things done for their constituents. And Rick Wilson and Nicholas Grossman and others don't know if that's the best idea. Well, here is the always vulgar Rick Wilson.
These guys are like rats in a bucket, and they're going to eat each other. Encourage it. Push it. Don't cooperate with them. Because if Democrats think that the country will reward you for being the grown-up, mature adults, while the other side is throwing their own feces at the crowd, you are mistaken.
Rick Wilson. All right. Wow. What else do I have for you here in the audio clips, the clip show section of today's podcast? Oh, this was very good. This is beloved veteran Colorado news anchor Kyle Clark, who earned a lot of respect and credibility during the presidential campaign in the past couple of years. He ended his broadcast Monday night, the 4-year anniversary of January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, with a warning about historical revisionism, which I think is absolutely worth hearing and sharing. Take it away, Kyle Clark.
As Coloradans await pardons from President-elect Donald Trump for storming the Capitol and attacking police on January 6th, as Trump rewrites history, memory holding the violence, calling it a day of love instead, it's worth saying out loud, you don't need the government's permission to remember the truth, to remember what you saw and heard that day when Trump supporters stormed the Capitol and attacked law enforcement in a failed attempt to stop the certification of an American election and keep him in power. You saw it in real time. There are tens of thousands of hours of video footage that led to all those convictions. You watched it happen. A president has the power to wipe clean criminal records, but not wipe clean minds and memories. But I'd also encourage you not to get so lost in remembering the last attempt to overthrow American democracy that you don't think seriously about the next one. Because of all the justifications for the January 6th attack on the Capitol, one has always stood out to me as the most chilling. Those who say they weren't trying to overthrow the government because if they really were, they would have succeeded. That's disguised as an excuse about the past. It's really a threat about the future.
Yes, well said, Kyle Clark. Good stuff. And some more good performance in journalism goes to the always excellent Mehdi Hassan, who somehow convinced Trump 2024 campaign spokesman Adolfo Franco, really? Named after two fascists? On Mehdi Unfiltered, he went back and forth with him, and I just think this speaks for itself, and this is how it should always be done.
Here's another brazen, demonstrable lie Donald Trump has told in recent days. After Elon Musk, the shadow president, came out in favor of H-1B visas for foreign workers, and the MAGA base came out against it furiously, Donald Trump told the New York Post, and I quote, "I've always liked the H-1B visas. I've always been in favor of the visas." That's a lie, Adolfo. He said in 2016, in a presidential debate and across the campaign, that the H-1B visa program was, quote, very bad, unfair for U.S. workers, and, quote, we should end it. Yeah. Why does he lie so much? When we saw it with our own eyes.
I don't think it's a lie. I think he's for the program, but it needs to be reformed. And it needs to be reformed. It can be manipulated. It's been a system that's been used many times to sue employers because of its use.
I understand the program.
You understand the program.
But these are your views.
Yeah.
Donald Trump did not say any of this.
Yes, he
I'm going to read it out again, just so you... I've always liked the H-1B visas. Yeah. I've always been in favor of the visas. Doesn't say anything about reform. Where in 2016, he didn't say anything about reform. He said, very bad, we should end it. He didn't say reform it, we should end it. Yeah. So he lied when he said he's always for it.
And you're cherry-picking in this
I'm not cherry-picking. Those are the only quotes.
In this way.
Which quotes am I missed from?
Because you're taking things out of context.
This is a desperate Trump defense.
No, it is not.
Out of context. context. He's a toddler who you have to interpret.
No, it is not.
I'm reading his words.
It is exactly what he has said consistently. The program has major problems.
That's not what he said in 2016. I'm going to read it again to you. I'm going to read it one more time.
I think the
very bad, unfair, quote, we should end it. What does end mean, Adolfo?
And I think there's a...
End means reform.
If I recall, there's a sentence or two afterwards that we need to find better ways to bring people into the country legally. And that's what he's referring to.
He explicitly says we should end the H-1B visa program. 8 years later, he says, I've always liked it and been in favour. That's a lie. Anyone who understands English knows that's a lie.
But you know,
unless English is your second language, that's a lie.
Mehdi, the program actually could be eliminated and replaced with a different program.
Fine, why didn't he say that last week? Why did he say, quote, I've always liked... I'm going to read the quote again to you because you don't like his words, I know.
No, but you're taking them out of context.
There's no context. This is a statement to the Post. Yeah. Take it up with the New York Post. I've always liked the H-1B visas. I've always been in favour of the visas. That is not true. He was not in favour of the visas in 2016.
I believe he has always, and I know this...
What you believe is irrelevant, Adolfo, with respect. It's what he said. This is what you always do. You come on and you say, well, Trump, you're confronted with a Trump statement. You try and find a way to spin it, reinterpret it. Because the facts are clear. He lied.
Excellent job, Mehdi Hasan, as always. Love it. Love supporting his work. I've never met that guy. I've never interviewed him and never talked to him. We used to follow each other on Twitter, but I have great admiration. Should try to get him on at some point or do something with him. Okay. I thought this was really good. Kamala Harris yesterday remembering the former president, Jimmy Carter. The whole speech was great. It's about 9 minutes, but here's about a minute from it, her eulogy.
Throughout his life and career, Jimmy Carter retained a fundamental decency and humility. James Earl Carter, Jr. loved our country. He lived his faith. He served the people. And he left the world better than he found it. And in the end, Jimmy Carter's work and those works speak for him, louder than any tribute we can offer. May his life be a lesson for the ages and a beacon for the future. May God bless President Jimmy Carter, and may God bless the United States of America.
Wow, she's a picture of strength over these past couple of days. Kamala Harris doing what needs to be done, showing up at a time it must be just so challenging for her. All right. Well, what else do I have? How about this? The Daily Show, Jon Stewart last night talked about the attempted terrorist attacks and the terrorist attack in New Orleans and the narratives that formed around them. But here's just a section where he talked about the Green Beret who blew himself up in a Tesla Cybertruck in front of Trump Tower in Vegas.
Fear not. More chaos to come.
Breaking news out of Las Vegas, where a Tesla Cybertruck exploded outside the Trump Towers Hotel.
Cybertruck exploded outside a Trump hotel. So even terrorists are political cartoonists now? A little on the nose, don't you think? I mean, come on. I think it's pretty clear what's going on here. Have at it, boys.
John, I'm going to point out the obvious. He goes to the Trump resort in Las Vegas. Donald Trump, he's in a Tesla Cybertruck. Elon Musk.
This was a statement. They was making a statement about Trump, about Elon.
Should the FBI be treating this as another attempt on Trump's life, even though he wasn't at the hotel at the time?
Why the I saw a car accident outside his hotel in New York. Let's make that number 4 or 5. Who cares what's really happening? But unfortunately, even for that narrative, the statement by the bomber was actually, I think Trump is awesome.
Officials say the man who blew up a Tesla Cybertruck outside a Vegas Trump hotel will express support for President-elect Donald Trump and Elon Musk.
Saying Americans need to, quote, rally behind President-elect Donald Trump and Elon Musk.
Far be it from me to tell someone how how they should express their affection. I've worked for years to become more open. But even I know that blowing up someone's shit in front of more of their shit, it's what we in the therapy business call a mixed message.
All right. Well, there you go. Those are the clips I grabbed for you from yesterday. There's a lot more, but I want to get to my conversation with Nick Grossman, which I think you're going to love. All right. Certainly hope you do, because I enjoyed it so much. He is such a super smart guy. I think he's a great communicator, both in written form and here in conversation. Definitely let him know that you enjoyed him here. You can reach him on Blue Sky, where he goes by Nicholas Grossman there. He's an international relations professor at University of Illinois. He is the editor of Arc Digital, the author of Drones and Terrorism. He covers politics, national security, and so much more. He's a real nerd, and the best kind, the kind we love to welcome here and learn from on Stand Up. Check him out at arcdigital.media and right now on Stand Up. There he is, Nicholas Grossman, one of my favorite people to read, one of the smartest analysts out there, in my opinion. Professor, welcome back. It's so great to see you. I'm sorry it's been so long since I've reached out, but I hope in 25 we can talk more.
Sure. Hi, and thanks. It's great to be with you again.
I got to ask you real quick about this kind of breaking news before we connected here today. We saw everybody reporting on Mark Zuckerberg's new announcement about fact-checking in Meta, which is the company that owns both Facebook and Instagram and Threads, where he announced in an online video that his companies would end their current fact-checking process and pivot to, quote, community notes, which is this model was implemented by Twitter or X and Elon Musk. I got to get your thoughts. How big is this?
So I'm not sure. I think the immediate reaction of people thinking that now Facebook is going to, and Instagram and the others are going to transform and allow all of this misinformation or to stifle all this facts. They were doing a decent amount of that already. It's not something that their fact-checking was not exactly good, that they had already a conception of bias that said it's not true-false that we're really aiming for here. It's balancing out different partisan perspectives regardless of that. So a good example of this was one of their trusted fact-checkers was the Daily Caller, originally the Tucker Carlson publication that has kind of continued in his vein. And so already they weren't great with that. Already that they had at various times either promoted or suppressed some content. Conspiracy theories had already gone like wildfire there. But I did think that the announcement itself was weird. Just the phrasing of it is weird. And it really seemed like another one of these billionaires, tech billionaires, media mogul billionaires, doing obsequious, bending the knee to Trump. Just making a show of saying, look, we'll let you lie here, and we're going to adapt your framework that true and false are not something that's really knowable. It's left or right, but that has to be in balance, or whoever yells the most then becomes that is truer, and that who's to say what exactly is factual reality or not. Although, at the same time, I wouldn't take it just as maybe a weak move by him. There's also maybe some element of corruption, of sensing opportunity. And I think this is with a lot of the billionaires genuflecting before Trump, that one might be that they're afraid of him and afraid of being punished by a unrestricted president, but also that they are tempted by a bribable president. And that includes, say, from Meta's perspective, really wanting to kill off antitrust and to make it that they don't potentially get broken up, which granted under this administration is unlikely, but that they were facing as a looming long-term threat.
I think that is a really perfect analysis, that last point. People make it too much of they are afraid of Trump hurting them. And then that becomes vague because what company are we talking about? What billionaire or organization company are we talking about? But the point is, and they also say they just want tax cuts and so that they can become richer. Fine. Even if that's the case, is that really the incentive and motivation for guys like Bezos and Elon who build rocket ships shaped like penises? Or is it that, as you said, antitrust, that they want a door open or a door against their competitor closed so they can merge, so they can operate this way or that way? It's that they want a favor, that they want a handout, that it's corruption at its finest, isn't it? Really? Just large-scale oligarchic billionaire corruption deals?
I think that's a big part of it, that Meta has moved beyond. It is at a size where it is long since left behind the exciting startup version of itself and even the acquire exciting startups version of itself. And it's General Motors or Standard Oil or AT&T or something at this point. It has what economists call it's interested in regulatory capture. As they suddenly went from saying, this was a few years ago, they suddenly went from saying, no, regulation is bad, you got to have freedom of the market, to, oh, this regulation sounds important, and we're very interested in our lobbyists helping write, would you like to see some of this draft language? And that is pretty typical of giant conglomerates. Also, keep in mind that trying to, in some degree, fight misinformation and disinformation, that takes effort. That is, it takes money, it takes time, people have to do it. Nobody is ever happy. There's always somebody who is unhappy that either you did take something down or you didn't take something down. A lot of right-wing interests have been working the refs with internet fact checkers the same way that they did with various mainstream media institutions, where anything, no matter how false that they say that gets taken down, is therefore an attack on freedom. And they make sure to let people know that in some cases they probably are consciously lying, and in other cases probably just believe it. But either way, it becomes part of the victimhood complex, and then the people at Meta have to hear about it, and they have to hear about it from Zuckerberg, probably from some of his rich, well-connected friends, and how nowadays, oh, it's so woke, and why are you doing that? And it is easier to just, for example, let, anti-vaxxers run wild and spread conspiracy theories than it is to try to first discern what exactly is the line between, okay, this isn't scientifically accurate or well supported, but it's just somebody saying something and that's their speech rights, and the line between this is a dangerous lie that is going to potentially get people killed, including people who, like with anti-vaxxers, people who didn't believe the information, but were immunocompromised and therefore were next to somebody who wasn't vaccinated. Where exactly is the responsibility there? And Facebook in the past has facilitated, not really on purpose, but facilitated mass violence in Myanmar, for example, and elsewhere, of things that some have accused of the level of ethnic cleansing, even genocide. And they let this stuff spread like wildfire, and they've already done that in the past. So it's not a dramatic change from them. I do see the announcement, especially Zuckerberg's part about that they're going to move their, was it truth and safety or fact checking or whoever, that apparatus, they're going to move from California to Texas where people are less biased. And that was one that just it was such a weird thing to say and just seemed like a very political kind of culture war thing to say. Yeah, that was part of his official announcement that Texas, where people are less biased.
To me, it's interesting that you made it through his whole announcement and I punched out after a minute or two. But I will go watch the whole thing. I'll probably play it for everybody because I think it's important. But wait, what? He said he's moving to Texas because he said so that, by the way, is not – that's the – Texas is now Joe Rogan, I think, is president of Texas now. And a lot of people, obviously Elon Musk moved to Texas, right? And his plants. And I think, who was it? Someone just moved from Texas because it was too hard. I think maybe Mark Cuban. I'm not sure. But the bottom line is so many have now migrated there. And what did he say?
That they're moving I think they call it their truth and safety team, or maybe just their safety team, or I don't remember the exact language. This would be the people who would deal with things like disinformation, harassment, other doxing, other things that content moderators would do, that they're moving it from California to Texas, where people are, or where things are, I forgot the exact language, you can look it up, but are less biased. And what I thought was funny about that was, one, it just misunderstands exactly who lives where. Trump got more voters in California than in, I believe it's 47 other states, that Texas and Florida slightly edged it out. But Kamala Harris's number 2 state was Texas, in terms of number of votes she got, that beat New York, for example. So a lot of the whole red state, blue state thing is really artificial in that regard. But also remember that this is where the business angle comes back in. Texas has lower taxes. Texas has fewer regulations. Is it really an issue that you make a play? So Zuckerberg makes some play to the culture war, right? About how, the people in Texas are unbiased, but the people in California are so biased, basically meaning Democrats, liberals, the left, that's what bias is, and Republicans, right wing, whatever, Trump is MAGA, et cetera, that is unbiased, that somehow that is default, and he plays to them. But also at the same time, while he's saying that and they're nodding along, he would then move some operations where he doesn't need to pay as much for healthcare or for taxes or for other things that would be oligarchic business interests that really aren't about speech at all.
Oh, we are into it now, aren't we? Nick, in terms of the timeline. There's been such great value, I think, sadly, in historians, those who cover and have taught us about the history, specifically of fascism, because it seems most applicable. And we've learned so much, and it does seem like history is repeating itself in a lot of ways. Also, you can deny the Holocaust now. There's no fact checkers and slavery and say that the wars started for a different reason, or you can erase January 6th. And there's all kinds of different things that you can do with reality. So as a result of social media and more, I just wonder how much you think about about history and about how it's playing out, but that when we use the word fascism, it totally applies. But I feel like sometimes I get stuck in historical views of things and not take into consideration how much has changed and apply those changes, specifically with technology, society, culture, and wherever the doomsday clock is, and apply them to today's kind of fascism. How important is history to what we're seeing play out now, vis-a-vis what we're talking about, the blurring of reality, or any other issue that you want to talk about or mention?
So I think it's a mix. I think this is what you're getting at, that there's both important lessons to learn from history, and there's also a danger of getting too caught up in it. I think this was part of the issue with a lot of the fascism debate, that what exactly is fashion? People start using the word, and then people start getting, and I actually think at this point it's moot that I feel perfectly comfortable calling this fascist, but where a lot of people thought that, fascism means Nazi Germany. And not just Nazi Germany, like early on Nazi Germany, but the late World War II Holocaust, or at least starting with things like Kristallnacht, and the one that you see in movies. It's what is fascism? Schindler's List. That's what fascism looks like. And so then they look around, and they don't see a bunch of guys in armbands goose-stepping in the streets and rounding people up. And so they go, in that case, it's not fascism. And that threw us off a decent amount about thinking about it. So I think that we can take a lot of valuable lessons from it, and not just the Germany and Italy examples, but others like, Pinochet in Chile, or Franco in Spain, and some of Imperial Japan you can throw in there. But especially the big analogs, I think, for what the U.S. is experiencing now are not those 20th century fascist states, but 21st century democratic backsliders, one where a ruler gets a national leader gets power legally via election, and then proceeds to dismantle the institution from the inside, to corrupt it, to make it less democratic. And we've seen versions of this recently in the 21st century in Hungary and Russia, India, Turkey, Israel. There are a few others, and at this point, quite a bit in the United States, and that January 6th was a big marking on that, and we have continued further in that direction. So one of the ways...
The better analog is to actually watch what is happening right now in Hungary, or what happened with Bolsonaro in Brazil, because each country is different for a lot of reasons. And that's also, I think, really important. People don't realize, as I didn't, that Hungary it was easier for Orban to do what he did there because their system didn't restrict him as much as potentially our system can hopefully restrict Trump in a second term. And so let me just pivot then to not the reason I had you on, because I could talk to you about every one of your posts, and I hope to talk, like I said, to you more. But I felt like I didn't cover January 6th here on the Daily Podcast. I shouldn't feel guilty because there's a billion outlets. Everybody's doing it, but it's important that we put a great emphasis on it. And so I looked around, though, and read some great pieces and from a lot of the victims of January 6th, the op-eds that are in the New York Times, for example, of Aquilino Ganell, and talking to Harry Dunn and other police officers. But I felt like the best piece was yours, that you published over at your Substack. The January 6th attackers won. The 4th anniversary of the Capitol attack marks a dark day in American history. A lot of people are obviously writing about it, but a lot of people I respect and like widely sharing this piece obviously caught my attention, so I wanted to get into it with you. You write, 4 years ago, a violent mob of Trump supporters attacked the United States of America. In 2 weeks, their goal of restoring Donald Trump to power and effectively ending U.S. constitutional democracy will come to fruition. Take it from there, Nick. They won, huh?
Yeah, they won. That I see no value really in sugarcoating it at this point, of maybe talking about it differently before the election. But Yeah, they won. They attacked the United States for the purpose of, again, not sugarcoating it, ending constitutional democracy, that the winner of the presidential election becomes the president-elect, and then it gets a peaceful transition. If you reverse that, you have effectively ended constitutional democracy.
Yeah, there can be no other way to see it. And he told a lie that made those people believe, enough people, lots of people, and he did it. He absolutely did. And he won, and he got away with it.
Yeah, and did get away with it because of course, it didn't succeed right away there, but it set off the chain of events that made the 2024 election effectively an up or down vote on rule of law, on the core American idea going back to George Washington that the president is not above the law, that you think of John Adams says, we are a nation of laws, not of men. And Teddy Roosevelt is the one who said, no man is above the law. And that was the thing that made us different from England, from King George, and that we learn when we're kids, or that differentiates the United States from, Hitler and Stalin and any of the other dictators. And that were raised like this. And by Trump taking on the legal system directly, by committing a bunch of blatant crimes, extremely important high-level crimes, and not getting held accountable and then getting reelected anyway, that means that he will be taking office without any concern for the checks of impeachment or criminal trials. And we have never seen that before, or losing reelection. Haven't seen that before. And that is basically what the January 6th attackers wanted. They wanted a authoritarian country under Donald Trump. I don't think many of them would have articulated it that way, especially not some of the less conspiratorial, more caught up in the moment types that were there, including some that are criminals and deserve the trials that they got. But still, they wouldn't really think of it that way or talk to each other in those terms per se. But that was what they fought for, and that is, in a different way, what they ended up getting.
Yeah, really well said, really well written. And there's some of this, we lost the war but won a few battles language in this piece. Specifically, you talk about and give credit to Congress's January 6th committee did a good job uncovering important facts and getting them on record. Federal law enforcement did a good job prosecuting January 6 rioters, convicting over 1,000 people. They got the most dangerous insurrectionists securing jury convictions for leaders of the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys for seditious conspiracy with decades plus prison sentences. They correctly indicted Trump and some of his co-conspirators, such as Attorney John Eastman, rather than preemptively forfeiting rule of law. But they ultimately failed to uphold it, you write. And then you talk about Attorney General Merrick Garland and Jack Smith and the state prosecutors in Georgia and Arizona. Just tell me the detail about those battles that we did win or we made valiant efforts and why they came up short, or criticisms of what they did wrong.
Sure. So one thing I've been thinking a lot since the election is that the people who reacted strongly to Trump's coup attempt and to January 6th and who set out to defend American constitutional democracy, that we shouldn't really feel bad. I feel bad, certainly, about what ended up happening. I feel very bad about that, where things went. But it's not a moment where we're not sitting here saying, oh, if only we had said something when there was still time to say it. We said it a lot. And the January 6th committee in Congress, I think, is a good example of it, that they fought through various barriers. They got a lot of information on the record. They held televised hearings that attracted a lot of attention. They were bipartisan, that Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, the Republicans on the committee, played a big role in that. But they did extensive research. They got various Trump administration officials on the record. They did tons of depositions. They got this, again, on television and got it covered by a lot of media. We know things. I've been teaching about January 6th with my students in my terrorism class, for example, and I show them things that the committee uncovered that I would not have known otherwise. And so we understand it better because of them. And similarly with law enforcement, they did a lot to prosecute. When you say get the most dangerous people off the street, at least like the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, the ones that really did organize violence and planned out sedition for the Capitol, that you can see on video doing things like moving in formation or initiating some of the fighting with police and getting the mob to surge forward, that they got taken off the street. They got put in jail. They got serious jury convictions. They got confessions out of some of them and to turn state's witness and rat on the others. They did all that stuff they're supposed to do. And even with Trump, that there was a debate over, should they just let this go? Wouldn't it be easier to just let it slide? And you don't want to make him look like an outlaw or something. And that would have been just preemptively forfeiting. That would have been going down without a fight. And they didn't. They went down with a fight, and it still really sucks that that's the way it worked. But on the debates of it, I'm mostly sidestepping this part. Could Merrick Garland or could Jack Smith or could any of the state prosecutors or any of the other law enforcement organs, could they have been more urgent? Because they have done stuff sooner and the thwarted Trump's strategy of delaying things? Or could they have tried any sort of different tactic, different strategy, and then he'd be in jail instead of running about to head into the White House? And I don't know. That'll be debated a lot. There's probably some could have done this differently at this moment that would have been in a better position. But given how he had both a very corrupt judge in the documents case with Eileen Cannon and a Supreme Court that made a choice to put him above the law and to declare that everything we know about the presidency from the Constitutional Convention and the Federalist Papers and George Washington, all that is wrong. All that is wrong. The only people who actually got the presidency were Richard Nixon and the ones saying that basically the president is above the law. And if they're going to upend American history like that, I don't know if there's all that much that others could have done. And given that voters facing all of this, it was not a secret what Donald Trump was and what he was about. And January 6th alone was all over television and something that, I don't know, I saw Saturday Night Live Weekend Update would make occasional cracks about, and it made it into the wider culture. And people didn't care enough to vote against it or to make that their main vote, or at least enough people didn't. And so that makes me hesitant to say that there was this one weird trick by which Donald Trump would be in jail now instead of heading to the White House.
It's just the comment that people made on the day of January 6th still, I think about and relevant to me is that because it was a bunch of dumb white people climbing the walls and doing stupid things. There was also a bunch of smart white people, I think, that were beating the shit out of cops. Depends on how you want to look at it. But
it was a mix,
if they were Al-Qaeda members, they're brown-skinned Muslims, or if it were Black Panthers or something like that, like it just would have been looked at forever differently. I often think it just gets a pass because of how many fools and idiots there were in that party and how there were elements that were just, they look like tourists walking through the Capitol and so on. And people have this view of January 6th that they want to have, and they wouldn't have that if it were a little bit different, if it were a little bit more organized or well executed sometimes. But it doesn't really matter. That point is probably less important than almost any other. And I wanted to read.
I think that's relevant also, say where, sorry to interrupt, but where, say, people's perception of it comes from, because part of it is that it was so many things at once, and that you could latch on to some people who really did seem like confused and caught up in the moment. And like you can see them in the rotunda looking around like, how did we get here? But also, a lot of it is about information flows and about propaganda, about efforts to lie about it, because people, the American people, were appalled at first, widely appalled. This was a cross-partisan consensus. Independents, Democrats, Republicans, people who don't pay much attention to politics, something on the order of 80% of over 80% of Americans said it was really bad at first. It was nearly 70%, including well over half of Republicans, said that Trump bears some responsibility. And then Trump and MAGA politicians and conservative media, including social media influencers, just hammered it over and over again. And they spread conspiracy theories. And they did, going back to the Facebook thing, they did disinformation strategies, which often are not just lie to somebody and try to get them to believe one lie. It's more, in Steve Bannon's favorite word, the famous phrase, flood the zone with shit, that just make it where there's so much chaos and so many people arguing that a lot of then regular people who are less invested in it just throw their hands up, I don't know what happened, or they're just arguing about it. The truth's probably somewhere in the middle, and let it go. And that would not have happened if there was not so much effort by relatively powerful forces, including, say, media and politicians, to get Republicans to think that, to get even, say, some independents to think that as well, and to change their initial impression of January 6th as something that was really negative. And that they could have if we had, I don't know, you think older, a few channels, Walter Cronkite type of media institutions, that then the go-to footage would not be some people seeing like one old lady who was confused about what had happened. It would be all the people beating the shit out of cops, or the Oath Keepers walking in formation, all in fatigues and moving through in what is clearly a strategic, deliberate action, or any of the videos of just what looks like meth heads sounding insane. And that would have been the go-to things. Yeah. You're right in that it is easier to do that in America when we're talking about white people and we're talking about white conservatives, and especially in this case, a decent amount of them with money. But it still took a lot of effort. It was more fertile ground.
The argument always made by Republicans on this issue was, what about Black Lives Matter? And it was always, you're never really going to get people to be convinced. But the bottom line, the difference between Black Lives Matter, which is just our generation civil rights movement for black people, to minimize its definition, I think most easily, basically, is that the insurrectionists and a lot of the MAGA movement, they were so angry and so scared that they went to Washington and sacked the Capitol on a lie, on one lie. The black people and those who support them that are in their streets were in the streets as a result of generations of oppression and discrimination. Not one lie, like a million microaggressions a day, much less huge amounts of oppression throughout history. So like the comparison of those things was academically incorrect, much less dumb for even the dumbest person to believe, but it worked. That's the point. Those arguments work because black people were in the streets and they were violent at some time. But it's, but for what? Versus why that unfortunately my uncle went to the Capitol. Now he's in jail because he believed something that wasn't. And I think we're going to see more of that as a result of social media. We're going to see more people and obviously being animated about things that aren't happening, like Haitians eating our cats and our dogs.
Yes, and fueled by misinformation is a big part of it. And even if you look at the comparison in more detail, it actually doesn't tell. So it's not just the whataboutism and with the comparison, but where there were a bunch of people at January 6th who just went to a Trump rally and they peacefully protested. That's their First Amendment right. And whether I agree with them or not, they're the equivalent of the vast majority of Black Lives Matter protesters. The people, again, whether you agree with them or not, went onto the streets and had placards and chanted slogans and exercised their First Amendment rights and then went home. And then there were also violent incidents, including some riots associated with it. And you know what? Most of those people got arrested and prosecuted. There were way more arrests for rioting that were associated with George Floyd protests than there were for January 6th. Yes, way more. And that's because more people were involved, but also because you had and there were a lot of crimes. But the reason why it also doesn't come up as clearly is most of those charges are state and local. Somebody sets fire to a building or someone does, smashes in a window and steals a bunch of stuff. That's not a national issue. That is something it really sucks if you're the one who owns the store and feel bad for them that I would never want that to happen to me. But that's something that the local cops take care of and your insurance company takes care of. And those arrests were happening. Those prosecutions were happening. Like the guy who threw a firebomb into a Minnesota police station, Minneapolis police station. He got arrested and tried and got over a decade-plus sentence in jail, just like the seditious conspirators with January 6th. It actually shows law enforcement being pretty darn fair and not being politically biased. And yet, through this disinformation engine, got manipulated into somehow there was some sort of unfairness where somebody was being given special treatment. Or if black people get to riot, how come black liberals get to riot? How come white conservatives don't get to riot? Isn't that so unfair? And that's another good example of twisting what was a actually pretty fair process as far as law enforcement goes into something that was somehow politically biased and unfair. And you're right that people really do believe it. That I've had a lot of conversations where it gets to this point where they simply don't believe me that a lot of people got arrested. And I'm showing them articles online of, look, this guy's in jail. Here's the trial record. And so maybe that just happened once. That isn't the poor persecuted January 6th attackers. And it's because it is important to their sense of identity, to their worldview, to be able to think this, that if they had to confront the fact that this was January 6th was a violent attack on America, and it was unquestioningly caused by the President of the United States illegally attempting to stay in power after he lost re-election and lying to people, that would mean then they have to vote against it. They have to be bothered by it. That'd be bad, and that's what they don't want to do.
I like the conclusion that you come to on that psychology, that it's important to their identity. And I fully agree, obviously. But within that, they're outraged. They have a grievance and it's real. But I think what's more important is that there is somebody who is feeding them a lie. They know it's a lie about what is the actual catalyst for that grievance. They're actually struggling, but they're blaming the wrong causes. I always point to the financial crisis of 2008 and Mark Levin and the whole right wing and Republicans constantly blaming black people who bought homes they couldn't afford, as opposed to the deregulation of the financial industry and the fact that the entire world suffered from that collapse. So it couldn't have been black people who bought homes they couldn't afford in whatever state or city. And so people, they have that identity, but they're fed a grievance by name your favorite right-wing media star, much less a guy at the top. Like, even with the balls of Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, Mark Levin, and Rush Limbaugh over the years, and Alex Jones lying about kids dying, like, who has more audacity than Donald Trump to just lie about literal shit we saw right in front of our face?
Nobody. I think that is the best to ever do it, or at least I guess best to do it maybe in this country. Vladimir Putin's very good at it too. And this fits back into that idea of democratic backsliding, of where a previous presidents in the United States had certainly they lied at some point, but this is one of the tricks about everybody lies. Yeah, does everybody lie at the same amount, to the same degree, about things that are, do they lie as blatantly, about things that are as obviously true? Is this sort of piss on my leg and tell me it's raining type of lie, up is down lie, how egregiously, how often? And no, it's unparalleled. Not everybody does always have that same level. Yeah, no, it's just, I'm trying to think of the best way to characterize his dishonesty and the impact of it. But I guess just I always get interested in the paradigm of politics and campaigning, and not everybody lies about how many women they sexually assaulted. Like, some people lie about a couple, but they usually don't get that far because just the sniff of it doesn't help your political campaign. But man, this guy lied about dozens of women, and that should matter. But again, he gets away with it. Back to your piece though, real quick, Nick. At the end of it, you write, for nearly 4 years, I've said that January 6th would be a near miss or a prelude. To the extent I have a voice, I stress that we should make it the former. Others did too, including people with bigger platforms and more influence. It didn't work. Events went the other way. Politics is ultimately a competition for power. While the rules may have changed, it's never over. Trump and co.'s efforts will be hindered by their own infighting and incompetence. Civil society will push back. Hopelessness at this point is unnecessary defeatism. But still, this anniversary marks a dark day in U.S. history. Unlike the forces that attacked America at Fort Sumter, Pearl Harbor, or the Twin Towers, the January 6 attackers won. Ooh, that broke my heart to see you write that. It broke my heart to see you write it, because I really think you're so smart and your analysis is so good, and I don't disagree at all. And maybe other readers did, or maybe obviously I want to give you the opportunity to say more about that. No, I wish I was wrong too. I didn't like writing that. The thought had occurred to me the 4-year anniversary on, of course, January 6th is not the same as those other type of attacks. Granted, Fort Sumter and Pearl Harbor are not alike, and neither is like 9/11. They're all different. The point is made. Yeah. Yeah, but you think 4 years after each of those, the Confederacy was in a lot of trouble and the Civil War was almost over. They were almost surrendering. And Japan was in a lot of trouble 4 years after Pearl Harbor, and they were almost surrendering. And Al-Qaeda was reeling, lost their base in Afghanistan. And granted, I would not say that the war on terror was going well 4 years in, but that overall, in hindsight, bin Laden's dead. His last time we talked, I think it was when Zawahiri was killed, that the 9/11 leadership, Al-Qaeda is devastated. Their general goal of collapsing the U.S., of straining the U.S. in the way that they strained the Soviet Union, or at least the Mujahideen did in the 80s, and then the Soviet Union collapses. That was what they were hoping for, and the United States is still standing, even went through the financial crisis, was still standing, and that in the same 4-year margin, that the January 6th attackers are on the march, that the ones that are the ones that have been put in jail are likely to get let out, especially a lot of the biggest leaders, the ones that were most dangerous, that it was good that law enforcement, for punishment reasons, for deterrence reasons, but also for that basic get the dangerous criminals off the street reasons, that a lot of them are likely to get out with presidential pardons. That will send a signal that it is good and beneficial to you if you commit crimes and do violence to help Donald Trump, to help empower him more. And I don't know what's bad. That is bad. And yet I also really wanted to include that hopelessness is unnecessary defeatism part, because I've seen a lot of that going around. And,
let me just interrupt because you have a whole piece about that. You actually link to it in the word when you write we can't give in to whatever unnecessary defeatism. You link to a piece that you wrote back in November, shortly after the election, titled "Authoritarians Want You to Quit. Don't withdraw entirely, but it's okay to partially disengage. The future will be tough, and you're in better position to fight it if you stay sane." And then you explain how you're adjusting, which is a really great piece. Take us to the historical concept you were pointing to before I interrupted you to mention your own piece.
Oh, thanks. No, just that's part of the game. And this I think all connects with the disinformation stuff also, that the part of what authoritarians try to do of all different stripes is to exhaust people. I get a question sometimes about why do people like, say, when Saddam Hussein in Iraq would have elections and he would give himself like 99.2%. If they're going to fake it, or Putin seemingly does this sometimes too, if they're going to fake it, why don't they give themselves like a solid 62 or something that is like it's a clear win and they can claim a mandate, but also where it's plausible-ish that there would be a lot of people like, I voted against him, but I guess there just weren't enough of those. Whereas when they do the 99% thing, there was one time in one of these elections, I think it might have been in Syria, or Iran, but where they claim that one of the candidates got fewer votes than there were like members of his extended family in his hometown. And all of them were like, oh, no, we definitely voted for you. And so then everybody knows it's fake. So why don't they try to fake it in a believable way? And part of the answer is because then they show you that they can lie to your face and you can't do anything about it. But hey, I know this didn't happen. This didn't happen. I know. And guess what? What are you going to do about it? Nothing. You're just going to eat it. You're going to keep it to yourself. You're going to pretend that this is at least plausible. And all of you will act that way. And you can see some of this with the degree of billionaires giving a bunch of money to Trump's inauguration. It is so clearly corrupt that they probably, I bet most of them all know, they certainly know in their books that they haven't done this before. They certainly haven't announced it in this way. They know that a lot of it is going to end up being pocketed. It's not going to go to big parties. It'll, either they'll have the Trump organization do some business thing and launder it into his pockets or just put it there. And yet they do it anyway. And part of the reasons why is because, and this is, or like Zuckerberg with the, look at me, I'm backing off of disinformation. Part of it is showing that they'll do it. And from the perspective and whether the Trump people are doing this strategically or not, the fact that you have these powerful people showing that they will do it then signals to everybody else that, like, this is just the way you're supposed to act and you should be afraid of what the alternative is. Everybody's acting that way. And that's similar to what happened within the Republican Party with January 6th. It was so many of them were appalled at first. And then, we, like our tribe, our team, the way we talk about this is we say it was peaceful, or we say it was patriotism, or we say we don't want to talk about it. And most of them, even if they knew that was a lie, some of them would lie anyway. And others would just avoid talking about it or say something like, a lot of people feel very strongly about this, and it's important to respect their feeling. And their feeling was believing lies that Trump and other Republicans made up. But that ends up being part of the whole kind of broader attack on truth that is a part of authoritarianism.
Yes, the broader attack on truth. And you end that piece by saying, whatever you don't change your behavior in anticipation of what you think the fascists might want. As historian Timothy Snyder puts it on Tyranny, don't obey in advance. We've been hearing that a lot because we've been seeing so many actually do that. And you say, no one should make it easy for the government to do awful things. The state is strong. And if they really force you, so be it. But their time and resources are finite, and they're not the most competent people. Their strength is stubborn, relentless, and lack of shame, not competent execution. Make them work for it. They're nowhere near close to controlling everything. When they try to take things over but run into resistance, sometimes they'll decide it's not worth the effort. Sometimes you'll win. And besides, anticipatory obedience is at least as likely to show them you're an easy target as to get them to leave you alone. Ooh, I like it, as I like all your stuff. It's a really good piece connected, this one that I'm just mentioning. Authoritarians want you to quit. Don't give in, people. Don't give in. Don't withdraw entirely. Don't be that person. Don't let them win. We can't possibly be that soft, Nick. I'm soft, but I'm not that soft.
No, not that soft. I've actually been taken aback a bit by, say, the softness that I see or the fearful kind of anticipatory obedience. But I also want to emphasize that there is, though, that element. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, but there's a reason for that. Mm-hmm. Like, it's not that we're weak or maybe we are. It's that we haven't, a lot of people have pointed this out, we don't even know what democracy is until you lose it. Like, people are you're surprised by it, and I'm surprised by it because we pay such close attention and we understand history. And because I read you, I understand a lot of what this can be, but most people just don't. And so it looks like we're soft because we're just taking it. But maybe we shouldn't be surprised because they just don't really see this wave that potentially is about to wash over us.
The people that I'm calling soft are not, I wouldn't say average citizens. I think there are a lot of people who don't pay close attention to politics, who are not thinking this in big historical terms. And so I wouldn't want to hold them to account. I think for a whole lot of it, it's it can't happen here, or the future will look like the past, or, hey, politicians always say that. Hey, every president of our lifetime has been compared to Hitler. Then it's people, especially if you want, it's easier to dismiss it. But the people I'm talking about, I would say, with the softness one was those business leaders that, to the extent of, familiar with the phrase, right? Fuck you money. You reach this level of, I don't know, am I allowed to say
I'm just like,
can I drop F-bombs here? Does that matter?
I'm not familiar with that kind of money.
But it's not something I have. But with that phrase, I always took that phrase meaning when you reach the point where you can just flip anybody off. That you'd say, oh, I don't know, oh, you're going to sue me? Fine, I'll pay some lawyer and I don't have to pay any attention to it. It'll be annoying for you or anything along those lines. And so why get fuck you money if as soon as somebody starts saying, okay, do this, instead of just going, no, fuck you. Instead you go, yes, sir, whatever you say.
Yeah,
and I think
those are the people that you're surprised by. Yeah, that they don't have I suppose that
and some of the Democrats, and to the extent of some of the Democrats who have dropped any of the end of democracy, fascism, et cetera, rhetoric that they had during the campaign, and are now doing maybe they have some good ideas, and I'm going to try to work with them. And
their argument would be they want to actually get things done for the American people, and they think if they're calling him a fascist all the time, then they can't improve healthcare or environmental standards or keep the gains that they've won. I think that's the strategy that they're playing.
Yeah, I guess I'm skeptical that, I think that's what they think they're doing. I guess this is one where I don't know if I'm right or not. We'll have to see it play out.
Well,
but
you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the fascist. You got to get things done. Sometimes you got to work with a fascist to build new internet infrastructure and give away all of your retirement.
Sure. I'm skeptical. One is if the actual trade-off is there, meaning that the degree of normalization that they're doing, if that is actually going to yield policy concessions. Right. If they get it, then I will admit on this I was wrong. But I'm skeptical of that, and I think that the normalization part is additionally dangerous, and that in many cases what they're going to end up doing, this is kissing up to Elon Musk and saying, wow, it's so great that he's trying to cut the defense budget. Isn't that responsible? And the answer is no, because he's not trying to cut the defense budget. And I really doubt they're going to get defense cuts out of it. And therefore, whether I agree with those or not, and therefore saying, oh, isn't it great that he's doing such a good job working towards government efficiency, when what he's actually doing is lying, that perpetuating that has more downsides to it.
I just got to ask you one more question. We used to talk more. I discovered you through your work in writing on national security and terrorism. And I just wanted to ask you about how you're looking at the threat matrix, how media and national security experts should look at the different types of terrorism and terrorists in 2024 in America. Be very specific here. And what we saw over the new year, this ISIS convert who's a former military member and his truck terrorism, as well as the active duty Green Beret who blew up a Cybertruck in Trump Hotel in Vegas, as well as the very undercover guy who had apparently more weapons and bombs than anybody. And I think the FBI caught him, white guy. I've always looked at terrorism, domestic terrorism, right-wing, white supremacist extremists as the main threat. And I think for a lot of reasons, A, statistically, it just is. And B, they're harder to stop. It's harder to investigate Native-born Americans. They can blend in. They can assimilate. They can get away with things. And then finally, it's not very politically correct, believe it or not, to talk about active duty, much less former military members and their propensity towards terrorism. So how do you talk about the threat matrix? How should we in media discuss it? And how concerned should we be? Any part of that you want to look at?
So I think it's right to talk about it as terrorism, and to the extent that we can talk about it, to think of it that way, and to think about those as both as terrorist threats. Where, from a national security perspective, it is important often to say maybe what a biggest threat is, but it's not either or. We do it more as above the threshold. Is this a national security concern? When you can think about it, like I mentioned, looting after George Floyd protests, that's not a national security concern. It might be serious, but it's below national security radar, whereas terrorism gets on it. And both jihadists and white nationalists are the two main terrorist threats. where you're right in that the number of Americans killed in terrorist attacks, the number of terrorist attacks has been decently more by white supremacists, white nationalists, far right, than it has been by jihadists. And that's been running almost 20 years at this point.
Right.
Since when the statistical thing changed. So the New Orleans attack and connected to ISIS shows that jihadists are still an active threat, that vehicle ramming attacks are incredibly hard to stop, might be impossible to stop. You think you can't keep vehicles away from everywhere that people are going to be walking in downtown New Orleans on New Year's Eve. That is just not possible. Maybe you can wall off Bourbon Street, but you can't keep them away from everywhere. And there was another one in Berlin in a Christmas market just this Christmas. There have been ones in Barcelona and New York City. There was a big one in Nice originally.
If you kill a bunch of people with your car, you will always be able to do that, which is also, by the way, I don't want to get off on a tangent too far, but the absolute insanity of the argument that the right makes to make schools safer, to just basically metal detectors and armed doors everywhere. It's, I'll kill you in the parking lot then with my car or with my gun out there. It's just the point you're making is it's really impossible to prevent someone from mowing people down with the vehicle. You can't, even if you wanted to have some kind of national security state and make every carnival, state fair, and sporting event secure from that, you couldn't, even if you wanted to.
So just from a pure security question, that we cannot secure all the schools in the country. A local cop with a pistol is not going to get into an extended firefight with somebody with a AR-15 who is not only intent on murdering as many people as possible, but also probably doesn't expect to live through it, that is either planning on suicide or planning on suicide by cop, getting to a shootout. And while contrasting example is you take the Uvalde Police Department, the one in Texas with the school shooting, where they're all standing back and they're there in force and in numbers, that was really bad. But the one or two school security guards, that it is not reasonable to ask them to be action heroes. And
or true of anywhere else. The terrorist threat that I'm looking at, and getting back to the point, is the Charleston church shooter or the synagogue in Pittsburgh, or you meant in El Paso. I mean, it was a grocery store, Buffalo, I believe, the grocery store.
Buffalo supermarket,
those were Jews and black people and Hispanic people in all of those cases. They're a lot more afraid, including in their sanctuaries, and there's not a lot you can do. But that threat matrix to them is probably the greatest. I was always entertained and remind people that comedian Bruce made fun of me and all white people shortly after 9/11 because we were so afraid of terrorism. The Klan was terrorists. White people have always terrorized black folks in America, and now Jewish folks, obviously not now Jewish folks, but Jewish folks, Hispanic folks. We see the terrorism targeted towards marginalized communities. And so I don't know where you want to pick up, because I got off a couple.
Yeah, there's always been some of that, and it is true just by the numbers that white nationalist terrorist threats, including against those various minority communities, is if we had to pick one, again, jihad is definitely above the threshold, but is the biggest current threat. So the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting
honestly, we have to pick one, but we don't have to pick one, but talk about it honestly. Talk about it as a threat and talk about how often it happens, and don't make the other one seem far worse and ignore this one. I'm sorry to interrupt again.
No, but it's part of that's going to come from the government, and this is another unfortunate thing about where we're heading. But so I would call the Las Vegas Cybertruck bombing is a very weird case. That there's, in terms of whether it's terrorism or not, to be terrorism, you'd have to be a deliberately political action, something that is aiming to send a message, and whether a coherent one or not is a separate question. So this is just, for example, the terms I'm using, that something like the Sandy Hook shooting or the Uvalde shooting, I wouldn't call those terrorism. They're obviously terrifying to people, but they're not political. There's not something larger that they're trying to do. And the Cybertruck bombing, the guy seemed to be maybe an accelerationist, like society is collapsing and I'm going to wake everybody up to it. Right. And then also came out of big Trump and Musk fans, but in a warped way, and also an active duty Green Beret, and also seemed to have some pretty serious PTSD. And part of it was an elaborate suicide. It was all these things rolled into one, but it did highlight, and I think that you mentioned this earlier, that we shouldn't drop it, but that there has been a worrisome extremism problem in the U.S. military. And this is common to all military organizations. These are the people that we train how to kill, so they have some of the skills, people who have seen combat, and some of them have serious issues from it, and most of the people then don't get violent, but it does mean that some of them are more prone to violence. And there's also this self-selection of most people who join the military do so for responsible reasons. Some people do it because then they have an authorized excuse to shoot at people. And there has always been some of this. So after the Vietnam War, a lot of white supremacist groups, and this is what we used to call them more, this would be like the militia movement. And if you remember the Michigan militia and others, where a lot of these organizations would often try to recruit from returning veterans, because those are people who a subset of them are disgruntled, and a subset of them, and certainly a lot of them, know how to be violent. And this is also what groups like the Oath Keepers, that's where they got their name, was that the idea of they recruit for, its aims for current, if they can, but mostly former military, police, and firefighters. And with the idea that you swore an oath to protect the country, and their version of it, the people in charge of the country aren't doing it right, and therefore your oath requires you to attack the government and be violent about it. And so that is something that already was a problem, including now with, much like with the returning Vietnam veterans. This is from especially a scholar named Kathleen Bellow, Belew, if anyone's interested in reading up on that. She's very good about it. That then also now with returning war on terror veterans, that it's the same thing. And you could have, 95% would never do anything like this. And then 5% of 1 million or 2 people, that's a lot. That is a lot of potential recruits. And the problem, though, we are looking to tackle some of this, and this is, I think, a fault of probably didn't do enough of it over the course of the last 4 years, but there were some veterans, and they were including a few active duty members at January 6th that were part of the Capitol attack.
Oh, yeah.
And so there was some concern about this also. And part of the problem, which actually reduces that concern in a very weird way, but is that because the people who were pro-January 6th and who right-wing white nationalist extremism in places in the military, that because they are going to be in charge of the country in the future, we can guarantee that there is not going to be an effort to reduce their influence in the military or to use U.S. counterterrorism resources to try to find those sort of terrorists throughout the United States. And that instead, that there is likely to be a entire, if anything, maybe tacit encouragement of some of them, or so things like, I'll give you a specific example of this. However they try to do mass deportation, whenever the Trump administration, Stephen Miller, that I think it is a very safe bet that they're going to try, at least to some extent, and that they're also going to find that they don't have anywhere near the numbers to match the vision that they're talking about. That to get anywhere close to rounding up 15 million people, you need hundreds of thousands of men-at-arms and facilities, and they don't have anywhere close to this. You could take the entire Border Patrol and ask for volunteers, among police departments around the country, and you still would not get close. And so what that means, if they're going to actually try to do it anywhere close to the level that they're talking about, then they've been floating a lot of ideas about ordering the military to do it, or to help in some way or another, ordering the army. And the problem with that is there are going to be some people pretty high up in the army who recognize that this is an illegal order, that they are not supposed to operate on U.S. soil, that the idea of calling migrants a violent insurrection is just nonsense, and that they're not going to distort language like that. They're not going to play the misinformation game like that, and that their duty, because they've sworn oath to the Constitution, not to any one person, their duty is to refuse an illegal order. And so some of them might, and you know what? Then others will do it or will want to do it. And the Trump administration will like people like that. And who are going to be the ones that are most enthusiastic to go and, I want to use force and round up anybody that I think looks illegal, will be both some of these militia members and some people in the U.S. military who are sympathetic to that worldview.
I think a lot about, I try not to, but when I think about the efforts that they're going to make, I think about how that's going to play out on television, and how child separation was not great. I think it was not great for the Trump administration. Obviously, some people loved it. It was they get off on it. They're horrible people, in my opinion. But I think overwhelmingly, it politically wasn't good for them. I could be wrong about that, but I feel like the PR around this is going to be so bad. A lot of smart people I read and talk to think, there's definitely going to be camp-like structures built for hundreds, if not thousands of people who yesterday were working in a farm and today are not working on that farm. So the economic impact of it is the other PR issue. If you can directly connect these people being removed from these important jobs and then that job not being done, if you can connect that, that's not going to be good for them. It seems like one of those issues that is just not going to be a winner if you can take a more cold calculus and not the lack of humanity in it. If you could look at it that way, I feel like it's not going to be good.
I think you're right. And both about that child separation played poorly, and that also this is a good example of something where why people shouldn't give up, why hopelessness is misguided, that where there were, I don't know, ballpark it, a third of Trump voters or something who were really enthusiastic to cheer on violence against people that they hate on their televisions. But a whole bunch of them aren't, and a whole bunch of non-voters aren't. And some of them won't be paying attention, and some of them will fall for Fox News or whoever that is doing their best to lie about it. But also, some of them were like, I want to vote because I'm mad about inflation and I want lower prices. And then not only would they not get lower prices, just trying to deport a bunch of farm workers is going to raise prices. But not only would they not be getting that, but there are a bunch of things that will likely happen where some people, I don't know how many, but definitely a non-zero amount, are going to look at it and think, I didn't sign up for that. That was not what I wanted. And that this is elements where civil society will push back. That this, I think, is a good example of it, that where people will drag their feet, where even if they're ordered to do something, not really do it, where there will be immigration lawyers that are going to then quickly file injunctions. And where will there be some corrupt Republican judges that say, oh, I'm throwing these out? Yeah, of course. But will there be a number of judges, including even some that were put there by Republicans, who are going to say, this is a serious issue and I'm going to adjudicate it. Until then, you have to stop. And then will there be police chiefs who say, look, they say I have to stop and I'm not violating court order, and so on. And this reverberates out, and it will become, more difficult for them. And given that, I'd say Trump especially, but some of the people around him, that they're pretty lazy at times. They're because I'm easily distractible. They have a bully's heart, which means that they like going after easy targets. They like going after soft targets. The people who give in easily, those are the ones that you keep on picking on. And I think that your instinct on it is right, that it will be awful, and therefore it will play awfully, and that will result in some sort of pushback, and is a good reason not to immediately assume that in advance that the Trump administration is going to be able to do whatever their wildest imaginations say.
So well said. Really well said. I also, don't you think there are probably, there's some reporting and there's a lot of speculation that the tariffs are going to be selective, because the billionaires, captains of certain industries, like, you better not do that to my company, my industry. But even more specifically on the immigration issue, don't you think there's like a whole bunch of farmers saying, or food processing plants that are like, listen, a huge percentage of the people that are working for us, if you deport us, it's going to shut down the plant. I got to talk to an immigration expert about that. But it would seem, or some other expert, that a lot of these industries, much less actual plants and farms, rely heavily. And so it would seem that they're going to get, like the tariff thing, exceptions. I don't know.
I think so. Yeah, absolutely. I think that the tariffs are, to a significant extent, not entirely, but to a significant extent, tools of corruption. That it is a opportunity to punish somebody who is saying something that Trump doesn't like, to give somebody exceptions. That this was another one of those things where I can add it up in Democratic backsliding, in that all this is supposed to come from Congress. And in Trump's first term, he abused this power a bunch and did not get pushback from, or at least sufficient pushback from Congress, and of course didn't lose re-election over it. And so therefore will do it with abandon. But yeah, that there's so many opportunities for corruption from it, for this overseas corruption also. Hey, I can make exceptions for your company in your country. I can make exceptions for your country in your region. I could do additional ones on one of your competitors, on any of that. And that will become a bargaining tool of corruption. That this applies for many things in the Trump administration. And yes, I think that you can apply the mass deportation also, because the practical reality is they don't have the resources to do it everywhere. So where are they going to pick to do it? And knowing these people, that they will be very interested in picking somebody who is, I don't know, mean to them, or who they tried to shake down that said no instead of saying yes. Whereas the other ones who did pay up, then they'll do that. And then also, because they know, then they can always come back saying, that's admitting the weakness. If you pay up now, then always come back and, hey, we're looking for a new place to deport. I need to wet my beak. You need to re-up whatever it was that you were doing, or you need to go further. You need to crack down more of this. And a lot of this comes from Americans are still really used to thinking of the country, of the broad system, in rule of law terms. And we didn't always have that. People learn about the spoils system and the Gilded Age back in the day, but that the professional civil service and a rule of law approach is something that we take for granted because it's been that way our whole lives, but it wasn't always that way. In a lot of places around the world, it isn't that way. We mentioned earlier Viktor Orban with Hungary, and he and his cronies and his family members got really rich off of this stuff, that they're wildly corrupt, and they often put their own corruption over ideological or say political goals. It's their power and their corruption. So the Trump administration is going to be a mix of those that are principally interested in corruption and in being above the law and pocketing a bunch of money and being big shots, and those that are really ideologically committed. So I get Stephen Miller is a good example of, I think he really means it, that he wants it for its own reasons. And there are probably some like trade protectionists who really want it for their own reasons. And that will mesh with, I don't know exactly how, but that will mesh with the Trump or maybe Elon Musk or whoever else, that where at least a significant portion of it for them is the financial corruption and is the leverage over people. And how those exactly will clash, I don't know, but it is another point of potential weakness that will get in the way of them executing this in a way that maybe the most cohesive historical fascists were able to do.
You're so good. If I had a time machine, I think I would go back to find out who hurt Stephen Miller. Like, what happened? Why? Who did this to you? So talking to you is great. You're a brilliant analyst and writer, and I've just really enjoyed this. Sorry for taking you so long, Nick, but I just wanted to keep asking you questions and getting your thoughts on it. So I really appreciate you joining me. I hope we can do it more often this year, and I hope everybody will subscribe. I'll plug everything on the way out, but thank you so much.
Great, thanks. Yeah, my pleasure. And actually, speaking of which, I had an idea maybe, which is just something I'm not totally cohesive thoughts on it, but because I noticed you writing some of this either. I find the topic of like the current debate over masculinity interesting.
Good. Let's do a whole hour. Let's do a whole hour. But give me your views. Give me a preview of your thoughts around it and why. I guess maybe why you think it's important or why you're thinking about it. What are
So among other things, I saw your hey, I could be Joe Rogan of the left sort of thing. I shared that. I don't know if you saw. I was like, yeah, I endorse. But
I think the whole the notion is ridiculous. But there is no Joe Rogan of the left. There's no one person, but there should be an army of men who are fighting that, being the antithesis or a different version of men is all that's a joke. But you go ahead.
Yeah, no, but it's the same. I'm saying it also in a joke, but not entirely. So that was the same thing. I did not take it as, first of all, I think, the Joe Rogan of the left thing is silly. That in fact, part of this thing is about, part of the big difference between left and right a lot in this country, maybe in general, I don't know, but is the degree of fracturing. The left is a much more diverse mishmash. Is not everybody fall into line behind one guy.
That's why, I was podcasting and on radio long before Joe Rogan ever did it, and he eclipsed all of us right away because of his brand, and that appeals to so many people. My brand has not ever been appealing towards that kind of. But although I will say, and I'll let you obviously finish the point, I have certainly aggregated a following of like-minded men. We don't obviously agree on everything. We're not all the same, but there is this kind of effort to be a different type of parent and partner and so on. But go ahead.
But so that's how I've been thinking of it also, about where, or to some degree, because I have college students, right? Can I don't know, play a role in this, or do I have a responsibility to play a role in this? And that where, because at one level, there's always what does that mean to be a man, or masculinity? Maybe the problem is there's no problem at all, and you should just say, be a good person, be a people. And you know what? Yeah, fine. And I think that's right at a philosophical level. But also there's, we're in this, golden age of gender awareness, right? So why is this the one gender that has to pretend not to be aware of itself? But also that you just can't. Did you ever read an article? This was by a guy named Dale Barron it was 4chan, the skeleton key to Trump. Probably came out in 2017. I still assign it. It's great. And one of the things that I got from it about how he was talking about the similar models of masculinity in the 1950s and 1960s. And about, this was the Hugh Hefner Playboy thing, about how, oh, hey, guys, what do you want? I don't know. You want to feel important and get laid and what have you. And so the way you do it is you get a job, you get a car, and you act in these sort of, you wear a suit, you act in kind of these classy ways, and you provide for a woman, and this is how you get Playboy models. And of course, that's not actually it. That was the way of selling. And that how any guy who bought into that hated the hippies just hated the hippies, because here are these dudes who were slovenly and with the long hair and with, I don't know, they're doing drugs and they're laying around and they're dirty and they're getting all these cute girls also. And how does that work? And so that you couldn't, if you just said to those guys, just, I don't know, see, you don't have to be this playboy type to be able to get women. You can just do your thing, be yourself, or be like a hippie if you want. And so in other words, just stop worrying about the problem. And what I really liked about this article is when people think, I've got this big problem and I'm really upset about it, you can't just tell them it's not a problem, stop worrying about it.
Yes,
that's not going to work. And so with all these other influences of, it's not unreasonable for a young man to be in the world and to think things like, what does it mean to be a good man? Or how do I be a man? How do I, like, what am I supposed to do? And that there's a lot of voices that have scrambled this, for better or worse, and in many ways I think for better, but that scrambled that idea. And that what can, I don't know, people like, say, you and me, of where have markers of, I don't know, I can tell a dirty joke, I recognize that there are differences between men and women, I've got a career and a house and a wife and a car, whatever the markers are of supposed to be, at least at some level, of the man who has made it, but without doing the version of masculinity that these guys are peddling that I really hate, which basically amounts to be a dick. And be a dick and be entitled about it, and you deserve all the perks of the masculinity without any of those responsibilities about protecting your community and protecting your family and providing for wife and kids. And I don't know, just so much of it, of where the idea that, to me, a big part of masculinity, being a good man, is about respecting women, but in a that is somehow simultaneously is respecting them as equals, but also not. Does that make sense? I don't mean not as equal, like in value, as equal but different.
No, of course it does. It depends on the paradigm that you think that you live in. Like, it's so easy to be like, gender is over because men and women can do anything that men can do. It's been proven over and over. And frankly, they're better at decision making. And someone might argue, so maybe they should be in more leadership positions. One might argue. But the truth is, we're in the gender paradigm that we are in. And so to be a man, the expectations happen to be in this society at this time in this culture, this or that. And that's part of the problem, but it also is real to most of us. I think that Richard Reeves did it really good in his book of Boys and Men. And he's got a whole initiative too. I think Ruth Whitman's book, Boy Mom, is also very good about this. But it's to the point that you said, that it's not like boys, we can't ignore the problems of boys and men. And I'll take it even further. And I've been trying to be careful about how I say this publicly, but I've spent my whole career and much of my life working against racism. I call myself an anti-racist as well as an anti-sexist, which I'm both racist and sexist in plenty of ways, but I try to fight back against that my whole life. But at the same time, I do want to acknowledge, as a very successful white man who took advantage of every opportunity that I was given and privilege that I had, I still suffer. I have suffered more in the last few years than I ever did before. And there are reasons for that. And part of them are the expectations that we are given as men to provide for my family. I lost my job, to be this kind of guy, to do this around the home. I met plenty of guys who aren't handy at all and feel tremendous shame that they can't fix things. Shame. Why? Because that's the world that we live in. And so let's take it and with a certain respect of reality, and not necessarily the world that we want, where gender doesn't matter. That'd be great, but that's not, I think, where we're at. How did I do? Did that bring up anything in you?
Yeah, I think, like you, I also, I don't talk about this publicly. We're beyond the recorded. I just mean how I say it. I'm always.
Oh, you want to make sure this is off the record. Okay. I want to be clear. Okay.
No, not even. I'm working through a lot of it. Or just thinking, meaning trying to figure out what I think. Then I know where I don't think it's a non-issue, and I think in part also about what can I do with it. And
it's a huge issue. It's a huge issue, and I think men more than anything need to work to do exactly what you're doing and I'm doing, to figure it out, because we created the issue to a certain extent, and we need to be the solution to the issue. And one of the most important things you can do is mentor a young man and show them a different way of being. And there's a billion other ways as well. But I love the idea that you're working through it, that you're admitting that, and that I'm interested in with a guy who is as analytical and philosophical and as self-critical as you, are, I'm sure, a professor even, someone who's so driven by their curiosity. I'm curious to see where you come out and the conclusions that you come to. I encourage you to do it publicly on your Substack or with me or anywhere else, because I think, or with your students, because I think it's important that we go on this journey together, and that to at least some of it that we can bear, we share publicly our shortcomings, our vulnerabilities, our embarrassments. I have done that my whole life. I don't expect you and plenty of other people who aren't that public about their personal life to. I mind my life for comedy, much less to create connection and community here, where so many other like-minded men have come to say, I got to figure out what my role can be or who I am because of my father or the society I grew up in or this role model that I had or, more importantly, didn't have.
In my case, I think part of it, this came up with my students after the election that I did. The election threw off the remaining classes of mine, and we basically just talked about stuff that was happening. And it went well, and the students did well. But one guy brought up the manosphere stuff and things about, I don't know, wokeness and feminism and being careful about what you say. And
he was supportive of it. He was giving his opinion, defending all those things, or he was.
No, I'd say he was in the middle. And in fact, I think his is much more typical. That even the idea that you're supposed to have a side in that, like it's a fight, you got to pick a side, and that's who you have to adhere to, is something that most people don't actually do or don't even really want to do. I don't really want to do. But where it came up, and there was a few sort of negative pushback from some of the people in the class. But he was just exploring it. He wasn't saying it was great, but he did believe not what they're selling, but he did believe the main premise, which was basically that the message from society on how to be a man is very confused at the moment. It's all over the place. And a lot of what the message was, and you could say from the broad cultural left, but was rejecting the very idea that there's something wrong with this, or that the idea that rarely says the word masculinity without toxic attached to it. And that, in a sense, he didn't know. Or he could see why some of his friends would find appeal in the guys saying, all those people are telling you, you can't be a man, but you are. And the way to be a man is be like me. And so where I had a good dad, I had, a good upbringing. I think I have a good sense of myself in that regard. And so a lot of what I've been thinking about it is, how in any way can I convey to my students, if anybody who reads me, of my own sons, that being a man does not mean being an asshole all the time. And in fact, it means like being supportive, that it is a way to be a man. In fact, it's a good way to be a man. It does not mean being feminine. It doesn't mean that you're giving up manliness to do it.
Yeah, there's just so many ways to talk about it. I find that words matter more in this conversation than any other because they're all so triggering. But I just do think that they all matter. And I think that more than anybody else, with your handle on language and even word economy, I think when I talk to you and read you, but you're sensitive to all of these definitions and all of these labels and different stereotypes that we fall into. But I have been thinking a lot about Jimmy Carter, as everybody has. And somebody, I think it was Kamala Harris, or somebody wrote, there is strength in decency and compassion. I think redefining strength and redefining and talking about character and saying the kind of man that I admire is the man who does good things for a lot of people and even critters in the world and doesn't talk about it. That you found out another way that they're such a good guy. They're an altruist. They have decency and compassion, redefining even pain and talking about finding a way to talk about your emotions without ever calling them emotions. I know an older gentleman who deals with all kinds of like depression, dealing with aging and anxiety that all of us will. So it's not even a criticism of him, but he doesn't like those words. People don't like those words. They don't identify with those words. They're words that make you feel weak. But if we could define weakness as strength, so I feel like all those conversations around words are what convinces, it gives a young man especially, or a suffering middle-aged man, a different way to look at themselves and their problems and to realize they're not alone. And this actually is strength. I am a decent person. I just didn't realize that it could be defined that way. I feel like that's where all of this lies, is talking about it in a way that doesn't trigger people with already preconditioned ideas and words. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think that's a lot of it, including with the conception of strength, that just the idea of doing something, even though it's hard for you, like it is difficult, it is hard for you to do, and yet you do it, that's strong. So if that includes something like admitting that you're struggling with depression or whatever words you use for that is an example of it. Or that
apologizing.
Yeah, sure, exactly. Apologizing can be strong. Or it bothers me how much the conception of strength, and this applies to international relations a lot, which is where I run into it.
Right.
Kind of like media conceptions of what's strong internationally. But that strength is bluster and yelling and putting on a big show. And if somebody pokes you and you yell and you scream and you show how much that upset you, and maybe sometimes, but also strength is something. So one is, I don't know, you poke me and another one, strength is move like that didn't do anything to me and moving on. And I don't know exactly where that one got lost. It seems like that one is lost, that how much of reality TV and internet and social media and a lot of it Trump, because Trump is a giant whiner. And where, I don't know, and a lot of the podcasters are too, that I don't know how whiny became that, like whiny and masculine became the same thing, or became so not same, but so associated with each other. But I think that idea of strength, and how we
have a hard time, men of our generation have a hard time understanding where some of our past traditional opportunities with work and purpose and partnership went. Because now women can be with women and women can do my job. And I'm stay-at-home dad and I've been emasculated. I can relate to all that. All that's in my stand-up act. When my neighbor came over and had to show me how to use my weed whacker properly, and he stood behind me and put his arms around me to show me how to hold it while my daughters watched. That didn't feel like it. But what I did is I took that kind of feeling and I literally made money off it. It's the funniest joke in my last hour of comedy. And you talk about it openly. I felt this way. And then guess what? Everybody can relate. Everybody. Every guy. All right. Let's talk more about that. And
so actually, I don't know. You can feel free to use any of that too if you want.
Okay, good. I will. I'm going to keep it on there if you don't mind, because people press stop anytime they want, is my view. And I'm going to encourage them to stay for this at the beginning. So I'll let you go now. I'm going to hit stop officially right now. And there he goes, Nicholas Grossman. What did you think of that conversation? Took a turn there. We thought we were done, and we just kept on going. And then I wasn't sure if that was on the record or not. Of course, he said I could use it all, and so hopefully it was worth something to you, informative, enlightening, appreciated. Would love to hear your insights and input, pushback, and criticism, any of it. Always want to hear from you. So email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com, and go follow Nick on Blue Sky and go support his writing at arcdigital.media. All of that is in the show notes for today and every day. You bumblebees listening all the way to the end, I love you very much. Thank you very much. JohnCarroll.org. Go buy his music if you haven't already, and I'll talk to you right here tomorrow.